His trademark is gunfire. His goal, grab the cash, no matter who gets in the way. In his wake, he leaves terrified victims, fleeting glimpses, and few clues for the FBI agents on his trail. But they are determined to find him and end this gunman's reign of terror.
In the late 1980s, the FBI matched wits with a cunning bank robber, a lone gunman responsible for the longest string of unsolved bank robberies in FBI history. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. The robber's planning was meticulous. He executed his crimes with military precision. It would take the combined skills of local police and dozens of agents to catch a criminal mastermind they called the Shootist.
San Diego, California. On November 5th, 1987, the late morning quiet shatters with a gun blast in a local bank. A gunman orders customers to the ground, threatening to shoot whoever disobeys. The robber forces the teller to fill his bag with money from all the cash drawers, warning against alarms, die packs, or marked bills. He avoids the vault, which would take more time. This robber hits hard and gets out fast. Employees call police immediately.
Yes, hello?
But even in the best-case scenario, it takes several seconds to get through to an operator, and several minutes for dispatched units to arrive. By then, the gunman is long gone. Authorities conduct a full crime scene investigation. Although the man wore no gloves, he was careful enough not to touch any surface and left behind no fingerprints. Bank robbery is a federal crime. The case goes to the FBI. Bank robbery coordinator Special Agent Jack Kelly considers this gunman a top priority. He's a takeover robber, taking command of the entire bank rather than slipping a teller a note. It's a rare style, used in less than 5% of bank robberies.
Even on the takeover style robbers, most of them didn't fire weapons in the bank. So he was, again, even a smaller percentage of the small percentage of takeover robbers that we had at the time. So from that aspect, he was considered to be much more aggressive and much more dangerous.
Also, he doesn't use a partner inside the bank, as most takeover robbers do. His violence has a profound effect on his victims.
Victims in a takeover-style robbery are pretty traumatized by the event, especially when there's shots fired in the bank, and consequently your descriptions can vary dramatically. I mean, as far as the age, the height, the weight, everything.
Some victims say he was wearing a disguise. Others disagree. The differing descriptions are of no real help, so agents turn to the bank's security camera photos.
We did have some surveillance pictures of mediocre quality at that time, and it was not a great deal of assistance to us in trying to identify who this individual might have been.
The photos show only that the robber is a white male about 6 feet tall with a beard and mustache. Agents face a serious challenge. No evidence left behind. No reliable description of the robber. Special Agent Kelly believes it's not the man's first time robbing a bank. Reviewing unsolved cases for similarities, Kelly suspects the same man robbed another San Diego bank a year earlier.
The modus operandi was identical, with someone coming into the bank, firing the gun in the ceiling, vaulting the counter, similar description.
The gunman left no evidence behind.
The fact that there were so few clues was an indication that this guy was pretty good, and he really probably planned these robberies very well.
Soon agents learn the gunman is not finished in the area.
After he robbed the second time in San Diego, he actually came back a month later and robbed a third time in San Diego using the identical MO and firing the shots into the ceiling.
The robber's choice to fire his weapon makes him a deadly threat.
I don't think a robber that does something like this would hesitate to shoot somebody if somebody actually tried to stop him.
California?
As a rule, Special Agent Kelly attaches code names to serial bank robbers to allow for shorthand communication among agents. Also, a catchy nickname increases publicity.
The media would be more willing to pick up the story and to show pictures in the newspaper or on television, which would hopefully help us generate some leads.
Kelly dubs this one the Shootist for his distinctive and dangerous MO. On December 14th, 1987, the Shootist robs a fourth California bank in Mission Viejo, 70 miles north of San Diego.
Check inside the bank. I'm going to go see what's in the convenience store here, see what we can find. Okay.
It was my responsibility to review all the robberies that would come in from the surrounding regional FBI offices.
FBI agents respond to the bank.
Special Agent Kelly with the FBI.
When a robbery occurs, you do an investigation inside the bank itself for any evidence, but you also do an investigation outside the bank to look for evidence or any possible witnesses that may have seen this individual, and we did both on all these robberies.
Bank robbery here just a few minutes ago.
Yet they get nowhere, like they're chasing a ghost. So far, the Shootist has stolen at least $44,000. But it's not just about the money. Agents worry that at some point he'll shoot someone.
We're dealing with somebody we thought that was going to become more and more aggressive during the course of his robberies, and consequently more and more dangerous. And it was somebody that definitely needed to be identified and stopped.
After a year-long absence from California, the Shootist struck 3 times in 5 weeks. Kelly suspects the Shootist must have hit somewhere in that year absence.
He's got to be somewhere else. He's got to be robbing banks somewhere else besides California.
Checking with other FBI field offices, Kelly discovers a string of similar unsolved robberies in Texas, with dates that fit neatly into the gap between California robberies. During one of the unsolved heists, the gunman used the sort of violence agents have feared. In July 1986, a white male with a beard and sunglasses hit a bank in Abilene, Texas. After firing his gun into the ceiling, he forced the manager to fill his bag. As in California, he wanted only cash from the teller drawers and warned against alarms, die packs, or marked bills. The employees followed all instructions to survive, but then...
Don't you move! Don't you move! Don't be looking at me! Stay down, the same thing's gonna happen to you!
The robber ran off, leaving the bank manager writhing in pain from a gunshot to the abdomen.
Go lock the door, go lock the door. I need the police here right away. I'm at Everly Bank. We've been robbed and the manager's been shot.
Texas Rangers, the FBI, and EMTs responded immediately. The manager was gravely injured, but she survived. The other witnesses couldn't provide a solid description. It happened so fast, and they were so terrified, they didn't get a good look at the gunman. The crime scene investigation came up empty, and the security cameras provided only more photos of a robber with obscured features. Special Agent Kelly contacts the Texas Rangers, who are working the unsolved robberies.
Ranger Thomas.
And investigators in the 2 states pool their information. They know the Shootist targets branches near highway on-ramps for a quicker escape. The investigators agree the Shootist likely has a getaway driver, but no car has been spotted. Each heist is as clean as the last, and no solid leads emerge. The Shootist pulls off 6 more heists in Texas and California in 1988. Investigators hoped the media attention would continue. They need someone who recognizes the gunman to call in a tip.
But because of the danger of this individual, we were hoping to get as much cooperation as we could, and we did. Local newspapers would run pictures of this individual. The local television stations ran pictures of this individual.
With the ongoing media coverage, the Shootist rises to infamy. His is an astonishing spree. 14 known bank heists in 3 years, all perfectly planned and executed. The Shootist is destined to make FBI record books. A cunning adversary, like they've never seen before. By 1988, a man called the Shootist has robbed at least 14 banks in Texas and California. Special Agent Jack Kelly.
He was well organized and planned things out well enough where he didn't leave a lot to track him with.
What he does leave behind are bullets fired into the ceiling. If forensic examiners can find rifling marks on the slugs, they can run them through their ballistics database. And if the gun has been used in other crimes, they might get a lead on the gunman's identity. But that's a lot of ifs. Ballistics experts determined the slugs came from a .38 caliber revolver. But there's a problem with finding traceable rifling characteristics.
The rounds that we did find were pretty well damaged. They weren't really going to be much benefit for identification as far as the rifling was concerned.
The Shootist continues his spree. His 17th known robbery is in the San Diego suburb of University City. Once again, no hard evidence remains in the bank. But outside, investigators find signs of just how meticulous the Shootist is. It appears that before the heist, he loosened fence boards across his escape route, so that after the robbery, he could reach his getaway car faster. Special Agent Kelly has chased more than 100 robbers, but this one's the most professional he's encountered by far.
And you had to give him some credit, he was good. But you always had the hope that maybe there was some piece of evidence or some witness, some other part of the puzzle that you could put together.
Yet despite a full neighborhood canvass, agents come up empty. By the middle of 1989, the Shootist is made off with nearly $250,000. And he's struck in at least 10 different cities.
Anytime an individual is mobile and he's able to move from not only city to city, but state to state, it really kind of complicates the investigation because there are multiple jurisdictions.
Kelly brings together law enforcement from around the country. California and Texas FBI agents, local police, and Texas Rangers work together, determined to find that one clue that has eluded them.
The more eyes and ears you have out there at the time, the more likely you are to get a break and catch this individual.
Because the Shootist acts like a professional, agents suspect he has an arrest record for robbery.
One of the logical leads to take is to look for people that just recently are released from prison and maybe going back to their old ways again.
Investigators asked about bank robbers released from prison in 1986, when the Shootist spree began. But it's a dead end. No one recognizes the man. In the surveillance photos, it's difficult to determine what the man really looks like.
And the hair, the mustache, it didn't appear to be real. I mean, it was extremely dark in color.
The task force concludes the Shootist likely uses elaborate disguises. Wigs, mustaches, even makeup to change his complexion.
When we first realized that he was probably wearing disguises, we actually took a number of the surveillance pictures to different costume shops.
Agents show shop employees the photos, asking if they recognize the man or the disguises. But it's another dead end. Investigators analyzed the Shootist's bank robberies, hoping to find a pattern. They compare the amounts taken to the frequency of the heists and determine the Shootist spends about $3,000 a week. When he runs low on money, he hits another bank.
You were able to see, not necessarily a pattern, but you knew that he was going to need X amount of money after a certain period of time.
Investigators note the Shootist usually strikes on Mondays and Fridays and often robs different branches of the same banking companies.
There were hundreds of bank branches in the general area where he hits. He was just a kid in a candy store out there with trying to select where he wanted to rob next, and it was our job to try to outguess him.
The team sets up surveillance on branches of the banks the Shootist seems to favor. They watch on Mondays and Fridays, the robber's favorite days. It's a long shot.
And the problem we had was we had absolutely no idea where exactly he would hit. There were so many branches, so many targets.
Sancho, this is Team 3, reporting nothing.
Manpower is limited.
Yeah, I'll stick it.
Predicting which bank he'll hit next proves impossible. Bank robbers often use casinos to launder stolen money. The task force sends bank surveillance photos to casino security offices. One California casino responds with a good lead. A regular high roller there looks a lot like the Shootist.
They were willing enough to give us their surveillance photos of the individual that they had suspected.
Agents track down the man and interview him.
Special Agent Manuel with the FBI
He
California.
does resemble the Shootist, but he has solid alibis for the robbery dates.
May 25th.
Investigators eliminate him as a suspect. Another lead crossed off the list.
We'll be in touch. Okay.
On June 23, 1989, the elusive Shootist strikes in Arlington, Texas, his 18th known heist. He has now hit banks over a 1,400-mile area. This time, a teller slips an exploding dye pack into his bag. When it blows, it renders the stolen money unusable. A few hours later, the Shootist robs another bank. He's never struck twice in one day. It's a reckless move.
Away from the counter, hands out where I can see him. Hands
Agents
down.
fear he is becoming more desperate. Special Agent Kelly fears it's only a matter of time before someone gets hurt.
Stay away from the counter.
The more robberies that he did and the more times he shot the weapon, including the time he shot the teller down in Texas, that's a great concern to law enforcement, obviously, because this individual, we thought, had a lot of potential for possibly killing someone eventually.
And the way the Shootist operates, he could take his next victim anywhere, at any time. In the late 80s, a team of investigators from Texas and California hunts the Shootist, a cunning bank robber who begins each heist with gunfire, grabs the cash fast, then disappears without a trace. As the robberies pile up, the Shootist becomes infamous in the Western U.S. police community. Everyone's on the lookout. Special Agent Jack Kelly.
Anytime in any jurisdiction that the Shootist hit a bank, we would send out our communications to the other offices as quickly as possible, providing them with whatever information we have in the way of maybe some new clues or new witnesses or any better surveillance photographs.
From the photos, the task force determines the Shootist likely uses a Smith & Wesson .38 revolver. a handgun popular with police departments. Investigators also notice he indexes his finger on the side of his weapon, just as officers are trained to do. It's an ominous possibility. The shootist might be a cop.
You, come here.
Even if he's not an officer, he seems to know how they operate. Investigators suspect he goes as far as surveilling local officers to learn their patrol routes, and then chooses targets away from those routes to increase police response time. The elusive gunman treats bank robbery like a profession, and his planning has paid off in more than 20 robberies. Investigators welcome the continuing media coverage. They know their best chance of finding the shootist might be through the public's help. One witness in particular provides an interesting lead. After the 1989 heist in Mission Viejo, a resident near the robbed bank saw a man climb into the trunk of a car, which then sped off. He described the car as a red four-door with California plates, but he didn't see the driver or get the plate number. Agents run checks on every car that fits the description in California, but there are thousands. It would take months to track down each car. But the sighting does confirm one suspicion.
When we found out that he was getting into the trunk of a vehicle, we knew that he obviously had an accomplice in these robberies.
On March 30th, 1990, the shootist robs the same Texas bank he hit a year earlier. To investigators, the repeat job means he's getting even more brash, unafraid of being recognized by anyone. By the end of 1990, the task force ties the shootist to 27 robberies that have netted him nearly $400,000, all without a single usable print left behind.
He was very cautious about vaulting the counters, not to touch things. Even going out the doors, he would hit the doors with his elbows or his hip to push them open.
Somehow, agents need to find a way into the shootist's secretive world. They take the case to behavioral profilers at the FBI Academy in Quantico, Virginia.
It's not that it's going to be able to place a name on the individual, but it'll kind of give us a little bit more about the guy's personality.
Studying details of each known robbery, the FBI profiler creates a behavioral sketch of the shootist. Because most criminals start working in their comfort zone, the profiler suspects the shootist is from Texas, where the first robberies occurred. The gunman's level of precision indicates possible military training.
You, come here.
Since the shootist has gone so long without anyone turning him in, the profiler suggests the robber has only one fiercely loyal accomplice. And experience with other takeover robbers makes the profiler believe the shootist will grow more violent as his spree continues. It's possible the gunman will choose a shootout over surrender.
This guy's going to be willing to shoot his way out of the bank or even take hostages to make an escape from the bank if he's cornered.
In April 1991,
Did you actually see a gun?
the shootist expands his turf into Northern California, robbing a San Jose bank of $15,000.
Okay. Did he shoot the guy?
San Jose Detective Sergeant Jack Baxter
We never found a witness as to where he went, what kind of car he had, did he have accomplices. We had no idea.
This time, the shootist leaves something behind. A partial palm print is found on the counter. But investigators can't make a match. Law enforcement agencies don't include palm prints in their files. The task force is back to square one. 2 months later, the shootist robs a bank in Bellevue, Washington, just outside Seattle. He's expanding his territory.
What do you have? I got off you in Bellevue, Washington.
Seattle was now in the loop. Now we knew that he was broadening his horizons and moving on to other states.
The elusive bandit is one of the most prolific and widespread robbers in modern FBI history. By 1991, the 5-year statute of limitations expires on his earliest robberies, so he can't be charged for them. Agents are racing the clock.
Well, he was a violent multi-state bank robber who was very successful, been hitting every 6 to 8 weeks, and no one had a clue as to who he was or where he was from.
In August, the Shootist robs a bank in Los Altos, California, bringing his known total to $474,457. Investigators find a solid clue, a false mustache. It's the first evidence recovered that might be physically linked directly to the Shootist. But at the time, DNA analysis is expensive and time-consuming, and they have no suspect profile to compare it to.
Unfortunately, that wasn't of any evidentiary value to us other than the fact that we confirmed that he was wearing a disguise, obviously.
By the end of 1991, investigators linked the Shootist to 33 armed robberies in 18 cities. Investigators have nothing. They need a break, and soon. Investigating the longest string of unsolved bank robberies in modern FBI history, agents have little but grainy photos of the man they call the Shootist. In them, they see the robber is wearing something beneath his shirt. FBI Special Agent Jack Kelly.
At first we thought it might have been body armor, but under closer scrutiny it appeared that this thing was really covering the lower abdomen and back portion of his body.
It could be a brace, meaning the Shootist might have a bad back.
Although he really didn't display that with his ability to vault the teller counters. But these back braces were probably just to support his ability to be able to do that.
Determined to run down every lead, investigators contact chiropractors in the areas near the banks. But they have only blurry surveillance photos of a disguised man, and they can't get to every doctor in 3 states.
And there's quite a few chiropractors, but we did cover as many as we possibly could, and we really didn't have any luck.
It's another dead end in the years-long search for the mysterious bandit. 1992 brings 7 more Shootist heists, including the repeat robbery of the bank in Bellevue, Washington. New total, nearly $600,000. Seattle FBI Special Agent Don Glasser.
Tried to process the bank for fingerprints, extensive interviews of the witnesses, and of course, our wildest hope would that someone would say, yes, I saw them get into a specific car.
No, I walked by, I saw the people standing out there.
But no one saw anything.
Where are you heading to? Well, I was heading to the other bank. I gotta take the deposit over there. Okay.
There is this concern that you're not serving the public well, that here's a man that's allowed to come in and do a bank robbery and fire a shot, and eventually there could be an accident or an intentional shooting. And, you feel it's frustration that you didn't do everything you could, although you can't think of anything else to be done.
They must stop the Shootist before he graduates to murder. During a heist in San Jose, the Shootist's luck begins to wane. This time, before he vanishes, the bank security camera catches the best shots yet of his face. A San Jose police forensic artist uses the photos to build a composite sketch of what the Shootist would look like without his disguises. Recreating features that are obscured requires a thorough knowledge of human physiology and a remarkable artistic eye. Agents blanket the target areas with the sketch, asking Crime Stopper programs to air it regularly, and placing it in dozens of banks. San Jose Detective Sergeant Jack Baxter.
We thought that in order to get this guy, we needed the help of the community. We needed somebody to call in with information, something that they had seen or heard.
On May 11th, 1994, investigators get the break they need. An anonymous caller says he knows the Shootist, though it's no slam dunk.
the information was fairly generic. The name that was given was Johnny Williams, or John Williams, and then he also supposedly used the name of Robert Hall.
The caller says Williams is about 40 years old, drives a red four-door, and has a devoted accomplice, his wife. He says Williams is always armed, has a hair-trigger temper, and has vowed never to be taken alive. In fact, he and his wife have a suicide pact if they're ever cornered. This is a good tip, but the case is far from over.
Those names are so common that there were literally hundreds of Johnny Williams and Robert Halls that we had to go through. And we tried to narrow the list down to the ones that were approximately the same age as the caller had given.
Agents cull through California DMV records and find a Johnny Madison Williams and a Robert Hall that appear in their photos to be the same man. They then compare the photos to the composite sketch.
It was an exact match for the sketch done by our police artist, just as if he had done it right off the picture. So we knew that we had the right guy.
California fingerprints drivers. The DMV fingerprint records confirm Hall and Williams are the same man. Johnny Madison Williams is a former Marine from Texas and has a record for robbery and theft there. Williams' wife, Carol, bought a .38 revolver like the one in bank security footage. And Carol drives a red four-door registered in her maiden name. Investigators find no legitimate source of income, yet the couple lives in a $350,000 house overlooking the ocean in Los Osos, California. FBI Special Agent Jim Wilkins.
The area where he was living was on high ground overlooking Morro Bay. It was an affluent area that actually had one road in.
It's an exposed area where agents might stand out as strangers.
We did not know where Johnny Williams was at the time.
Despite the risk, FBI agents have to check the house. They find a spot they hope is obscured and set up surveillance.
We knew he carried a weapon. We knew he would use it. We also had information from the anonymous tipster that he carried that weapon all the time.
Dispatch, no movement.
The agents see no sign that anyone's at the house. The team watches and waits.
We had made a contingency plan that if we saw Williams returning in that vehicle, we would do a felony car stop before he got into the neighborhood where we had safe fields of fire and where there were no escape routes for him in his vehicle.
Agents watch the house for several days, but the couple fails to show.
Stands to the end of the shift.
Investigators suspect the Shootist is off preparing for another heist. Jack Kelly has a hunch it will be in the Seattle area. The Shootist is robbed there in one-year intervals, and the year is up. Kelly contacts Seattle Special Agent Don Glasser.
He said, it's definitely going to happen. He's going to definitely rob in your area, so be on the lookout.
It's just a hunch, but it's all they have. Glasser hits the streets looking for the red car.
I was out of the office and on the street so I could be in the vicinity of the Bellevue area. Getting very antsy, very excited about being prepared to respond to a dispatch saying that there was a 91, a bank robbery.
July 1st, 1994. The Shootist strikes again. He robs a bank in Kirkland, Washington, just 10 miles north of where Special Agent Glasser is on patrol looking for him. After his trademark gunshot, the Shootist orders a teller to load his bag with cash. As before, he warns against bait bills or die packs and threatens to shoot if she tries anything. The teller accidentally drops wooden paperweights in the bag, which the Shootist mistakes for die packs. He's enraged. July 1st, 1994. The Shootist commits his 48th bank robbery.
Hurry up, hurry up, hurry up! What?
A frightened teller angers the robber, but she is spared.
What is that? What is that? What is that? What are you trying to do? You trying to get me caught? You're trying to get you, damn it!
The gunman runs out without firing another shot and disappears before police and the FBI can respond. Investigators get word of the latest robbery. Special Agent Jack Kelly's hunch about Seattle was right.
We knew where he was at this point, at least what vicinity of the country he was in the general Seattle area.
Kelly has already flagged Williams' credit cards, so he'll be notified if one is used. Just after the Kirkland robbery, the plan works.
I was fortunate enough to be able to get some information from one particular credit card company that had a recent transaction up in the state of Washington at a particular hotel up there.
Seattle Special Agent Don Glasser rushes to the hotel.
I went up there very excited. I know now we've got some real good information.
The hotel is in Bothell, 10 miles from the latest robbed bank. Johnny Williams used a credit card in the name of his alias, Robert Hall, to check in. But there's no guarantee he's still there.
I drove through the parking lot. I saw the red card sitting in the parking lot, nose in the parking space.
When Glasser calls in the plate number, it comes back registered to Carol Williams under her maiden name of Hawkins.
Hello, sir. How can I help you today?
Yeah, let's see the manager, please.
If Williams is still in the hotel, they must be careful not to tip him off or create a barricade or hostage situation.
Listen, what I really need from you is I need you to look at this picture, okay? I need you to tell me if...
The manager recognizes suspect Johnny Williams as Robert Hall and says he and his wife have not checked out.
So I immediately called Jack Kelly back, gave him the news, and suggested he get on an airplane and fly north, and he was already packing his bags.
At that point in the investigation, I was very excited. I contacted my counterpart, Jack Baxter, from the San Jose PD, told him they had the guy, not only we got him identified, but also we know where he is. So Jack hopped on a plane, and I hopped on a plane.
Glasser also calls for reinforcements from the Seattle police and FBI.
I'm here in Bothell at the hotel.
We made sure that none of our agents wore radios, guns, raid jackets, FBI, ball caps, any kind of identifying. Ask them to act normal when they were moving around.
Within minutes, more agents and detectives quietly arrive and set up a perimeter.
We made sure that no FBI four-door, as we call them, G-rides, were visible to this guy, that we would use surveillance vehicles. If we happened to casually look out his window, he wouldn't see anything unusual happening outside. We set up locations completely surrounding the hotel. We rented a couple rooms that would give us a base to operate from. So there was no way he would walk out. If he detected us, then he might try and escape. We made sure we had it really covered.
Rather than rush the room, the investigators decide to wait until they get a visual ID of Williams.
Yeah, I'm going to take a break for about half an hour.
We had made sure we had an eyeball on his door at all times.
By nightfall, Detective Baxter and Special Agent Kelly arrive from California. Detective Jack Baxter.
We didn't want to move too fast. We had to have patience, and we wanted to make sure we could arrest him in a way that nobody was going to get hurt.
The agents want to take Williams into custody outside his room in case he has guns inside.
As dinner time approached, we hoped that we'd see him come down and go to eat or something like that, and that we were prepared to arrest him if he did that.
But hours pass with no sign of Williams or his wife. While they watch, investigators have to stay under the Shootist's radar and not use police radios.
We had been told he had a scanner, so we had to be careful what we said on the radio for fear of tipping him off that we were there.
It does appear someone is in the room. Special Agent Jack Kelly.
We knew that there was a light on in there. We could see the light, all the drapes were drawn, and we could see the flashing of the television in there.
After 7 years, agents and police may finally have the shootist cornered. After an 8-year search, the FBI believes they have traced Johnny Madison Williams, the shootist, to a Washington State hotel room. A full day and night of surveillance passes with no movement from the room. In the morning, agents devise a ruse to see if their suspect is actually there. They recruit a hotel employee to help. Investigators show the man what their target looks like and ask him to knock on the door to ask a maintenance question and get a good look at whoever's inside. Despite the danger, the employee has to act natural. If Williams gets spooked, he could turn violent.
I need to change your filters.
When the door opens, the hotel employee asks when would be a good time to change the room's air filters. Detective Jack Baxter.
Our suspect told him that he was going to leave in an hour so he could come back in an hour and change the filters. Well, he ran back to us and positively identified him as being in the room. We had the room secured, so there's no way he was going to get out.
Now they know the shootist is definitely there. And in an hour, he should emerge.
I want everybody in place in 45.
An hour passes. Then 2. Williams could be on to them. But then an opportunity presents itself. Special Agent Jack Kelly.
There was a phone call from that room down to the front desk, and he had asked if he could borrow a typewriter because he wanted to write a letter to someone. And he was asking the people at the front desk if they could bring the typewriter up to the room. We instructed him not to do that.
On the FBI's order, the manager tells Williams he's welcome to use the typewriter in an office near the front desk.
Which he agreed to. Say be down shortly.
The small office is a good place for an arrest, away from the public, no chance of escape. Special Agent Don Glasser.
We quickly go to the room, decide where the typewriter is going to be, do a little quick rearranging of furniture so that we can go into that room once he's in there and not be obstructed by furniture. We have a nice clean path to get to him.
As a final touch, investigators place a sheet listing the Miranda arrest rights in the typewriter. Then hide in an adjacent room and wait for the word from their men outside. After 40 tense minutes, a man leaves the room and heads toward the front desk. It's Johnny Williams.
We saw him walking across the parking lot. Absolutely no question in our mind that is him. We recognized him as if he were our best friend.
He just left his room. He's on his way to the lobby.
This is it. The culmination of an 8-year chase.
He walked into the front desk, and they instructed him to go over to this office.
Mr. Williams, the office is ready.
So he walked behind the front desk and went over there.
Use this typewriter and this extra paper down here. Just page me if you need anything else.
Williams is cornered, cut off from escape. Agents know he is dangerous. They are prepared for the worst. But he is completely caught off guard. Agents take him into custody without a struggle. He is unarmed. Because of the investigators' careful planning, it's a perfectly quiet arrest.
I called him by his true name. I said, Johnny Madison Williams, Jr., it's over. And his head kind of dropped.
Next, agents have to get Williams' wife, Carol.
We figured there was no reason to charge into the room, but we just wait long enough, and she would come down. In fact, she did.
He's on the move right now.
She came out of the room and she was going to her car. And we just stepped out and took her into custody there without incident.
Freeze, FBI, you're under arrest. Place your hands where I can see them. Place them on top of the car. Hands on the car. Put your hands on top of the car. There you go. Hands on top of the car. Don't move, okay? There you go. Use your left hand. Other hand. Move the FBI, okay? You're under arrest.
Once again, a safe arrest. Now agents go looking for evidence.
He provided a consent to search his room, and in that room he had a couple scanners, he had handy-talkies, he had disguises, he had money.
They also discover the shootist's own notes, a log of all his robberies.
There was a gray briefcase that had a detailed record of the bank robberies, very, very organized, the date, the day of the week, information on the total, the address of the bank, the name of the bank. Very, very, very incriminating evidence.
Investigators find more in Williams' car.
He had 2 pistols and they were in the trunk of his car. We recognized the 4-inch .38 revolver from the pictures, surveillance pictures. We knew we had the right weapon. He had a 2-inch revolver that we hadn't seen before. Both of them were loaded.
The investigators separate Williams and his wife while they await transport to an FBI office for booking. Williams agrees to talk.
We linked him to, I think, a total of 48 robberies. And when I did the interview, he asked me that. He says, "How many do you have me for?" I said, "Well, how many do you think we have you for, John?" He says, "Oh," he says, "you know, you wouldn't be here arresting me and know my name and everything else. You probably have all 56.
Williams goes on to detail each of the 48 robberies the FBI know about, plus 8 they don't.
The entire interview eventually lasted about 12 hours, and I was writing constantly. I mean, I had writer's cramp at the end of the 12 hours with all the information he was providing.
Johnny Madison Williams took his work seriously, casing banks for weeks, outlining intricate escape plans. He says he wore the brace after injuring his back in a car accident and frequented chiropractors, just not the ones investigators got to. Knowing the FBI would try to trace his disguises, he stocked up in Dallas before he started his robbery spree. He tells agents he studied police routes, radio dispatch codes. All that work brought him close to $1 million in stolen cash, until authorities stopped him. Yet it wasn't just the agents and officers working the case who solved it.
Many times it's the assistance of the public that leads to the capture and successful resolution of these cases. It's very important. I think no more so than now with the terrorism threat. Is that important?
Carol Williams pleads guilty and receives 20 years for her role in the Shootist robberies. Her husband, Johnny Madison Williams, the Shootist himself, also pleads guilty to the 27 robberies still under the statute of limitations. He is sentenced to 92 years in federal prison. His unprecedented reign finally over. In Puerto Rico, violent militants murder a policeman, then turn their guns on a busload of unarmed Navy workers. and open fire on American sailors in the street. These ruthless killers have vowed to fight to the death. And the FBI must use every tactic at their disposal to track down the terrorists and end this rebellion in paradise.
A band of extremists waged a guerrilla war against the United States. Their goal, to make the island an independent nation or die trying. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. In 1983, the investigation became personal for agents when terrorists attacked their offices in San Juan. For the FBI, catching the perpetrators would depend on skill, patience, and turning a handful of small clues into one big break.
The Caribbean island of Puerto Rico is home to 3 million American citizens and a handful of anti-American terrorists. On August 24, 1978, 2 Puerto Rican patrolmen encounter what appears to be a stranded couple. They stop to help. Suddenly, 3 heavily armed men rush them. One patrolman tries to draw his gun, but he's immediately shot and killed. The other patrolman surrenders. The attackers force him into the woods and order him to remove his uniform. Then bind him to a tree with his own handcuffs. Back at the road, the couple attempts to disguise the patrol car so they can drive it to a hiding place. But before they can finish, headlights approach. The man holds up the dead officer's badge. He tells the men in the car to move along. It's a police matter. But the men in the car identify themselves as undercover cops and offer to help. The man urges them to leave. Instead, they grow suspicious. At a safe distance, the cops pull off and radio for backup. They arm themselves and head back to take on their attackers. But when the cops arrive, they see no one. Wary of an ambush, they secure the crime scene. After searching the area, they rescue the handcuffed patrolman and find his partner's body. 5 days later, a previously unknown terror group claims credit for the assault. Since the attack was claimed by a terrorist organization, the investigation falls under the jurisdiction of the FBI. At the federal building in San Juan, agents study the group's letter to the media, which includes diagrams allegedly showing what occurred. The group claims the patrolman overreacted, forcing them to kill him in self-defense. FBI Special Agent Rick Hahn.
We thought it was very odd that they claimed credit for this incident, particularly since a police officer was killed. But the communique was detailed and in fact included a graphic drawing of the events as they claimed that they had occurred. And I think that they felt like they had to justify the fact that the officer had been killed.
This new terror group calls themselves the People's Puerto Rican Army, or EPB in Spanish. Their stated goal is to turn the U.S. Commonwealth into an independent communist country, which is contrary to what the vast majority of Puerto Ricans want.
Those who wanted total independence were less than 5% of the island. So the representative numbers amongst the population that are in sync with the terrorists is a very small handful of people.
The letterhead includes the group's nickname, Macheteros.
Macheteros actually comes from the machete workers, the blue-collar people, basically, of the island, who they're claiming to represent. I think that they chose that name primarily to identify themselves with the unskilled laborers, the workers of Puerto Rico, the native people who would have been subjugated into things like chopping sugarcane.
Agent Hahn reviews the evidence so far. Police recovered empty 9mm shells, but no useful fingerprints or fibers. Sketches of the suspects proved to be too general to be of much use. With no real leads to go on, the FBI decides to watch several militants who preach violence, hoping they will lead them to the Macheteros. The police take a different approach, encouraging informants to infiltrate militant groups.
The police of Puerto Rico, having lost one of their own, are extremely focused on trying to resolve this. And they are recruiting young people and putting them into what they consider to be radical organizations on college campuses to try and ferret out who may be part of the Macheteros.
2 months pass as the FBI and police continue to search for leads. Then, in October 1979, the Macheteros strike again. At the U.S. Customs building in San Juan, a high-powered bomb explodes. Fortunately, no one is injured.
The symbolism of the custom house is that it represents the U.S. government's presence there in Puerto Rico. Everything that comes imported into the island comes through the customs house.
In a letter to the media, the Macheteros take credit. In response, the FBI and police intensify their efforts. A month and a half later, at the Sabana Seca Navy base near San Juan, 18 unarmed Navy personnel ride a bus on a routine trip to work. A vehicle stops ahead, blocking their path. A van pulls out and begins firing on the bus with automatic weapons.
They fired right along the black band on a typical school bus, which is right about where the floor level is, so that even individuals that would be hiding on the floor to try and get cover would have taken rounds through the side of the bus.
The attack kills 2 people and wounds 9. Agent Hahn coordinates the investigation.
This attack was so audacious and so brutal that it clearly upped the ante in terms of what the terrorists were willing to do to the government personnel on the island. This was the first out-and-out planned homicide, and that's clearly what this was. So it clearly upped the ante.
Agents collect shell casings. They run the VIN number on the abandoned vehicle and find that it was stolen months earlier. They also check for fingerprints and fibers, but find none. The attackers have left no clues. The media receives a letter from the Macheteros proudly claiming credit. At the FBI lab in San Juan, technicians study the shell casings from the Navy bus shooting. They determined that the majority came from a .45 caliber Thompson submachine gun. The others came from a .223 caliber rifle. Technicians compare the unique markings on the shells to those used in other crimes, but can't find a match. Once again, agents have no real leads. Determined to track down the Macheteros, the FBI brings in dozens of additional agents from the mainland. The additional manpower makes it possible to put intense surveillance on militants believed to be linked to the Macheteros.
It's only by watching them, watching their activities, and determining exactly what they're up to on a daily basis that we're going to be able to ferret out who's really a terrorist and who's somebody that's just talking.
While the FBI tries to find the Macheteros have already begun targeting the FBI. In Puerto Rico, a terror group known as the Macheteros murder a policeman and attack a bus full of unarmed Navy workers, killing 2 and wounding 9. With no real leads, the FBI takes a different approach. They decide to follow the money and try to determine how the terrorists get their funding. They spot a potential lead. A recent wave of armored car robberies. The highly organized robbers carry high-powered weapons, grab the money, and flee. The robbers leave behind no evidence. FBI Special Agent Fernando Candelario.
Abandoned vehicles that were recovered, we would trace to a name which turned out to be a fictitious name, and then it just got to a dead end.
Agents suspect that the Macheteros committed the robberies, but the crimes themselves provide no new leads. A month later, the Macheteros send a letter to the media claiming credit for a single $300,000 heist, though the FBI suspects they have committed many more. Through informants, the FBI begins hearing rumors that the Macheteros are led by a major Puerto Rican terrorist, Filiberto Ojeda. During the 1960s, Ojeda trained in Cuba as a communist agent. He returned to Puerto Rico and was arrested in 1970 for bombing tourist hotels, but he jumped bail and went into hiding. The FBI has been looking for him for the past 10 years. FBI Special Agent Rick Hahn.
He was the sort of individual who we thought was very capable of putting together an organization like the Macheteros.
If Ojeda leads the Macheteros, it helps explain their deadly discipline. The FBI increases its surveillance of militants suspected of having contact with Ojeda. 8 months later, while en route to a surveillance assignment, Agent Candelario hears on the radio that jet fighters have exploded at the Puerto Rican Air National Guard base. He heads straight for the base and is shocked by what he sees.
It looked like a war zone. Some of the agents that were Vietnam veterans were telling me how this reminded them of a combat zone.
The explosions destroyed 9 fighter jets and disabled 2 more. The damage is estimated at $45 million. Miraculously, no one was injured in the attack. Agents search the airbase for evidence. They find a machete painted with the letters EPB, an abbreviation of the formal name of the Macheteros. Agents believe the group left it behind as a calling card to taunt the FBI. Investigators determined that pipe bombs were placed in the jet's air intakes, exhaust pipes, and landing gear. They study pieces of the bombs but gain no new leads.
We interviewed every member of the Air National Guard to determine if this was an inside job.
But the investigators conclude that no one from the base was aiding the Macheteros. For agents, it is another dead end.
For many, many years, we've just collected a lot of evidence on the Macheteros, but we could not penetrate that organization.
Days later, sailors from the USS Pensacola take in the tourist attractions of San Juan, just as they're about to cross a bridge. Bullets rip through all 4 sailors. 1 is killed and 3 seriously injured. In a phone call to a radio station, the Macheteros take credit.
When I arrived to the scene, the young soldier or sailor was still laying there. My first reaction is, is thinking about the parents of that young sailor. He's here in Puerto Rico, he's unarmed, has nothing to do with the political situation in Puerto Rico, but he's a U.S. military, and that's the targets that the Macheteros selected. And it was just a tragic situation.
At the FBI lab, a technician examines the unique ejector marks on the empty shells.
It was determined that the weapon that was used was the .45 caliber machine gun that was used in Sabana Seca.
Agents have connected the weapon to at least 2 attacks, but are no closer to identifying members of the Macheteros. Devil's Night, the evening before Halloween. At 7:45 p.m., an event occurs that forever changes the FBI's attitude toward the macheteros. A huge explosion rocks the FBI's office. FBI Special Agent Jose Rodriguez.
The explosion was so loud that they suspected that it was a bomb inside the building. Because I was a bomb technician, I was one of the first people called.
Surveying the scene, Agent Rodriguez notices that the window glass has been blown in, not out. That means that the explosion must have happened outside. He searches near the building for evidence.
I started looking around, and I was able to find the rocket motor cover with the fins intact in the back parking lot.
He recognizes the object as part of an American law rocket, short for light anti-tank weapon. Agent Rodriguez discovers that the serial number is still intact, so the rocket should be traceable. A law rocket has a range of only 350 meters, so it must have been fired nearby. Agents interview everyone in the surrounding area and locate one woman who says she saw the attackers.
This lady said that this guy came into her yard. She came out the door. He told her to get back inside. He puts the law rocket on his shoulder and fires the law rocket at the building.
The witness says the man fled in an SUV, which was followed by a car. She describes both vehicles, and agents begin searching the surrounding neighborhoods. The FBI quickly finds the two suspect vehicles nearby.
People that lived in the neighborhood told us that they had seen people come dump the vehicle. One of them, the person actually gotten out of the vehicle and wiped the door, like he was trying to remove evidence of fingerprints from the door of the vehicle, which made it a very highly suspect vehicle.
Anybody else?
FBI Special Agent Marlene Hunter.
Think of anything else?
We started interviewing the people to get descriptions of the individuals that left the vehicle and just ensure that the vehicle was preserved until the agents could start processing it for evidence.
While interviewing witnesses, agents learn from the media that the macheteros have claimed responsibility.
We took it extremely personal because it was the first time that the macheteros had attacked the FBI specifically, and we wanted to solve that case. We wanted to charge the macheteros.
To do that, agents must find a way to penetrate their secretive world. The Puerto Rican terrorist organization known as the Macheteros has brought their fight to the FBI's doorstep with a rocket attack on their office in San Juan. Now agents work around the clock to follow up leads. The FBI asks the U.S. Army to run a trace on the rocket's serial number, according to FBI Special Agent Jose Rodriguez.
In other words, where did it come from? How did the macheteros get an American-made law rocket? The military did an outstanding job in tracing it. However, it was told to us that they suspected that some of that lot of law rockets had been left in Vietnam once the Americans had pulled out. And in tracing that, also we found that a ship had carried a large load of American-made weapons from North Vietnam to Cuba at one time. And we suspected that possibly that rocket had have gone to Cuba, and then the macheteros had obtained it from there.
In the FBI garage, agents processed the two vehicles believed used in the rocket attack. The vehicle identification and license plate numbers lead nowhere, and there are no obvious fingerprints. Agents look for evidence lost in crevices or fingerprints left while doing repairs. FBI Special Agent Fernando Candelario.
We decided that we're going to do this, and we're going to make sure that we get any piece of evidence that we can off that vehicle.
Under a door paneling, agents find a single fingerprint.
It's clear. Yeah.
It's a good
FBI
one.
Special Agent Marlene Hunter.
The fact that you were able to lift a print off of a getaway vehicle was very exciting. It was a great break.
The FBI matches the fingerprint to known radical Abelino Gonzalez. The fingerprint alone isn't enough to convict him. The FBI considers watching him, but fears it will be a waste of manpower since they suspect he will remain low-key in the wake of the attack.
So you have to have a team of approximately 6 people, at least, in 6 different cars to be effective, and it eats up your resources. So one of the particular investigative techniques that was being discussed a lot was wiretap, electronic surveillance. But where do we go? Do we wiretap Abelino? Do we look for a better subject, et cetera, et cetera?
In the garage, agents begin taking apart the SUV, which they believe was used to transport the anti-tank rocket. Deep in a pocket in the driver's door, one agent makes a critical discovery.
Because it is so humid in Puerto Rico, if you leave paper documents, they'll become sticky and they stick to everything. In this final pocket, we found the corner of a traffic citation.
The torn bit of traffic ticket includes the entire ticket ID number.
That was a very nice stroke of luck that the portion with the number on it was preserved.
At Puerto Rico's Department of Motor Vehicles, Agent Candelario tracks down the number. He discovers that the original ticket was issued to Pedro Ramirez Cesar Almodovar for an expired inspection sticker. He writes down Almodovar's home address and gets a copy of the original license photo. Agent Candelario has spent hours watching Machetero's suspects, but he doesn't recognize the man. The photo could break the case wide open, or it could be yet another dead end. At the FBI office in San Juan, agents hunt for official records on Pedro Almodovar.
We searched everything associated with the name, birth records, we searched tax records.
Agents find one record with the same name and birth date.
It was a dead baby's birth certificate that was used to get this identification. So we knew this person didn't exist as an adult anyway.
When the name proves false, agents concentrate on the photo.
That photo was copied probably 1,000 times, sent everywhere to see if somebody could identify that person.
But agents can't find anyone who recognizes the man. Agent Rodriguez goes to the address on Almodovar's driver's license. One address leads to another, where a woman with a Cuban accent answers the door. She insists she doesn't know anyone named Pedro Almodovar.
And I took the picture out of my pocket and placed it in front of her face and said, "Do you know this individual?" And it was as if she'd seen a ghost. She almost fell back when she saw the picture and immediately said, no, I don't know that individual.
Agents are confident she isn't telling the truth.
I knew that she knew who that person was.
Back at the FBI office, investigators run the woman's name through a database of possible terrorist supporters. In a major breakthrough, the computer indicates she's related by marriage to the family of Filiberto Ojeda, the suspected leader of the Macheteros. Agents now believe that the man in the photo is actually Ojeda.
We compared the photographs of Filiberto Ojeda Rios to Pedro Almodovar. There was a resemblance. Nobody could identify him positively.
Agents decide against watching the Cuban woman. They suspect their visit has been reported to the Macheteros, who won't go near her again for months. Instead, agents decide to put intensive surveillance on Abelino Gonzalez, the radical whose fingerprint was found on the getaway car. 2 months have passed since the rocket attack, and agents believe the terrorists may feel safe to begin meeting again. The surveillance teams take great pains to avoid being detected.
The rule of thumb on that team was don't get burned. If we pick up an individual and we lose him in the first half hour, then we'll pick him up the next day.
2 weeks into the surveillance, agents watch Gonzalez drive in circles around a parking lot, apparently trying to determine if he's being followed.
They were trying to detect surveillance. It was an exciting moment. We were observing excellent tradecraft on the part of these two macheteros.
Finally, Gonzalez stops and picks up an older man.
The decision was made to drop Avelino and concentrate on the person that he was meeting to try to identify him.
Agents follow the older man to a second-story apartment an hour from San Juan. Investigators rent an apartment across the street and watch the man. They check the name on his apartment and car registration, but find out that it's false.
And we were doing surveillances on him for a few days, and he was very, very watchful for surveillance activity. He would use different public phones, and he would use different one every time he'd make a call, even in the same evening.
To identify the man, agents come up with a creative plan to obtain his fingerprints. The next time, the older man makes a phone call and leaves. An FBI agent moves in and cuts off the handset. Even if the suspect notices the cut cord, agents don't believe it will tip him off.
We have vandalism here all the time in Puerto Rico, and nobody's going to think anything of it.
FBI technicians process the payphone receiver and are able to pull fingerprints from it.
The FBI lab came back, said that the latent fingerprint that was discovered on that telephone was that of Filiberto Ojeda Rios.
The FBI has found the alleged leader of the Macheteros.
It was like Christmas come early. I mean, we had confirmed everything that we suspected, and that's when the case was designated a major case of the FBI.
Agents could arrest Ojeda on an old warrant for jumping bail. Instead, they decide to continue watching him to try to identify other members of the Macheteros. The FBI wants to take down the entire group and bring peace to this troubled island. A Puerto Rican terror group known as the Macheteros wages an unpopular war for independence, attacking local police, the American military, and the FBI. Although they claim to be freeing the country from American oppression, less than 5% of the island's population supports their cause. After months of intense surveillance of suspected members of the Macheteros, agents have identified the leader of the organization, Filiberto Ojeda, who has been a fugitive for more than a decade. The FBI continues their efforts to identify more members of the group to bring them all to justice. A month after identifying the terror leader, the FBI gets an unexpected break. At an office building in San Juan, police respond to a burglary. An entire floor of the building had been broken into. In one of the offices, authorities found some suspicious documents that appeared to belong to a terrorist group. They called the FBI. FBI agents searched through the office's filing cabinets. FBI Special Agent Marlene Hunter can't believe what they find.
Fairly quickly, it became clear that it was the central archives of the Macheteros organization. Not only their archives for historical purposes, but also records regarding future actions that they were going to take. Another interesting find were minutes of meetings that went all the way back to the date they were formed in 1976. It was a gold mine.
In a chilling moment, Agent Hunter discovers that the terrorists have compiled detailed information on individual FBI agents.
There were files with FBI names and their family members, where their children went to school.
The threatening discovery underscores the danger to agents and their families.
It really made you realize that maybe you needed to not take the same route all the time. You needed to always assume that someone could be following you.
Other documents describe the group's terrorist activities, but names for places and people are coded. The FBI takes the files as evidence and attempts to crack the codes. With the evidence collected so far, the FBI gets a judge's authorization to listen to payphones used by Filiberto Ojeda, the alleged leader of the Macheteros. As with their documents, the Macheteros also use code names when speaking on the telephone. FBI Special Agent Fernando Candelario.
We heard a lot of conversations where the codename Aguila and Aguila Blanca were mentioned. But in the contents of the conversation, we couldn't really tell what Aguila or Aguila Blanca was. Aguila means eagle, and Aguila Blanca is white eagle.
Agents suspect Aguila refers to a person, and Aguila Blanca is an operation that person conducted. Whenever Ojeda arranges to meet someone, agents follow in an effort to determine the new person's identity. If possible, agents retrieve objects the person has touched and send them to the lab to be fingerprinted. Agents use the fingerprint results, surveillances, and wiretaps to match terrorist code names to real names. Agent Hunter leads the effort.
I always liked jigsaw puzzles when I was a kid, and this was like one big jigsaw puzzle. We had multiple layers of code names that we were able to piece together through careful coordination of the physical surveillance logs with the electronic surveillance logs and independent investigation.
The FBI identifies more members of the Macheteros one by one. Agents use the new information to get authorization to put a microphone inside Ojeda's apartment. When agents see Ojeda leave one night, they enter to plant the bug. They find the interior doors partly open. Agents recognize this as a clever counter-surveillance tactic.
Their MO to protect themselves was to leave interior doors open at a certain gap, and they would measure it. And in case that door was moved by an agent inserting a microphone in that residence, they would know somebody had been in here.
Agents carefully reset each door to avoid tipping off Ojeda.
We didn't want him to move. We were afraid if he moved, that we'd never find him again.
At the FBI office, Agent Hunter continues her efforts to decode a list of names and phone numbers from the Macheteros files. Agents believe the phone numbers have been encoded through a mathematical formula. If the FBI can crack that code, they will have phone numbers for all the Macheteros. Agents capture a real phone number electronically at the same time that they overhear Ojeda call the man by his code name. Agent Hunter uses the real phone number and the corresponding coded phone number to try to figure out the formula.
I was able to play around with the sequence of the numbers, and it wasn't an easy code. It wasn't, like sometimes they add 2 to everything or subtract 1 from everything.
Her determination pays off. Agent Hunter makes a breakthrough and rushes to tell the team.
I went over where they were, and I said, "You can't believe this, I just broke the telephone number code." Oh, they were thrilled. Everybody was thrilled with that. That allowed us to decode all the telephone numbers, and we could get the real number, and we could say who the real person connected to that code name was. So we were able to sort of unmask and figure this group out.
With the codes cracked and listening devices in place, the FBI overhears the Macheteros arguing over money. FBI Special Agent Jose Rodriguez.
Heather wanted to use the money to further the cause of the organization and to establish better relations with the Cubans in Cuba. They had sent, I think it was $2.2 million to the Cubans as a show of good faith.
Agents are puzzled by the huge amounts of money that the Macheteros seem to have.
But we got $6.8 million that the organization is quarreling over, and we wondered, where did they get this money?
Agents totaled the losses of all the recent bank robberies and armored car heists in Puerto Rico, but they don't come close to $6.8 million. Agents send an urgent bulletin to all FBI offices asking if anyone has any unsolved multi-million-dollar robberies. An answer comes from Hartford, Connecticut. A year earlier, at an armored car depot, a guard gave co-workers a knockout drug and stole $7.2 million. Agents in San Juan note that the guard in the so-called Big Sleep heist is Puerto Rican. They suspect that the Machitero operation, codenamed Aguila Blanca, is really the Big Sleep heist.
We decided to pull more tapes, previously transcribed conversations where Aguila and Aguila Blanca were mentioned. And now, with the context in mind that this could be the armored car robbery, it started to make sense. The Macheteros had committed this robbery. They hadn't claimed responsibility for it yet, though.
It no longer was just an investigation of the law rocket attack on our building. It was a group that had gone to the United States to steal $7 million, which at the time was the second largest robbery in U.S. history.
Prosecutors advised the FBI that they would prefer to try the Macheteros in Connecticut for the Big Sleep heist. They worry that a murder trial in Puerto Rico would fail because jurors would be too frightened.
It was going to be difficult to get a jury that would be willing to convict, assuming the evidence was right, a member of the Macheteros. The Macheteros, you mentioned that name in Puerto Rico, and it instilled fear.
The FBI decides to continue its surveillance until it gets enough evidence to convict the Macheteros of the Big Sleep heist. But before the FBI gets the additional evidence it needs, Ojeda suddenly disappears. Agents fear that Ojeda has somehow caught on to their surveillance. They will have to get their additional evidence elsewhere. The FBI decides to focus on another target, Ojeda's right-hand man, Juan Segarra.
Juan Segarra Palmieri was a very active member of the organization, what I would call a shaker and a mover. He was the one that made things happen. He was the brains of the organization.
The FBI has a microphone inside Segarra's house, but it has gone dead. Agents watch Segarra and his family drive away and move in to repair the bug, leaving the front door unlocked. The agents fix the broken microphone and prepare to leave. Suddenly, Agent Candelario gets an urgent message.
When I am wearing an earpiece with the radio unit, and I hear the green station wagon is coming up to the residence. This is the aircraft is calling this out.
An FBI plane has spotted the vehicle of a known member of the Macheteros. He pulls up to the house and notices the unlocked door.
When we heard he was in front of the door coming in, we went to the bedrooms. Myself and another agent went into the closet. The closets had no doors.
The agents know that the Macheteros are almost always armed. They hear footsteps coming closer. If the terrorist comes into the bedroom, the confrontation could turn deadly. Agents repair a hidden microphone in the home of a suspected member of the Macheteros, Juan Segarra. But just as they finish, a terrorist enters. FBI Special Agent Fernando Candelario and another agent hide in a closet, guns ready.
It's obviously a member of the Macheteros, a dangerous terrorist organization, coming into this safe house to protect it. We don't know if he's going to come around that corner with a weapon. I'm not going to tell you that we weren't scared. We could hear him speak. He would say, "Aquí no hay nadie. Is there anybody here?" We didn't answer. And he'd go to the other door. "Aquí no hay nadie."
The terrorist begins to enter the bedroom.
We have no closet doors. We're in an open space. All this guy had to do was walk in and look to his left, and he would have seen us. And we don't know what would have occurred at that point. Had he assaulted us, then there's only one way to go there. We would have shot him.
But then he leaves. While the terrorist is in front of the house, the agents escape out the back. Later, agents listen worriedly as the visitor tells Juan Segarra what happened. The terrorists begin searching the house. If they find the microphone, it could ruin years of hard work. FBI Special Agent Jose Rodriguez.
What's going to happen to the investigation? Is it burned? Or are all of them going to flee, go underground?
But the terrorists fail to find the microphone. Once again, Puerto Rico's high crime rate helps cover the FBI's tracks.
We did hear them conversing about this incident. They don't know if it was FBI or not. Could have been a burglar.
Agents watch Segarra go out at night to make phone calls, leaving his wife and child at home. Through their listening devices, they hear him make calls to his mistress in Boston about laundering money.
She was definitely a player in the organization. She was hiding money for him, and she was also exchanging money that they suspected to be hot for clean bills up in Boston.
Agents have just identified a major part of the money trail from the big sleep heist. They apply for authorization to put a listening device on the woman's phone. With new evidence from Segarra, agents begin planning the end game, the takedown of the macheteros. They want to arrest all the suspects at the same time.
We didn't want someone to make a call to somebody else, say they hit me over here. So we didn't want one team to hit one place and go here and hit another place. We wanted simultaneous hits on these houses.
During the arrests, agents also went searches of more than 30 locations all across the island. To make it all happen, the FBI will need nearly 300 agents. In preparation for the takedown, the FBI secretly flies hundreds of agents and their equipment to a Navy base in Puerto Rico.
We brought down in helicopters, we brought down Suburbans, the HRT brought down all their gear. It was very massive movement of FBI personnel, something I've not seen again in my career.
But the FBI has to put the raids on hold when the number 2 machetero suddenly goes to Mexico.
Juan Segarra Palmer was a very important individual in this case. A lot of the evidence that would point to his guilt would also point to the guilt of others. We needed him at trial.
Hundreds of agents wait for Segarra to return to U.S. soil. From the wiretap on his mistress's phone, investigators know that Segarra plans to return soon. A tense week passes. Finally, Segarra leaves a message on her answering machine.
He tells her, "I'm in Dallas, and here's my phone number where I can be reached."
The FBI uses a reverse directory and finds that the number belongs to a payphone at the Dallas-Fort Worth airport. Dallas FBI agents find Segarra by a payphone, waiting for his mistress to call back. They plan to arrest him at the same moment as the rest of the raid. In Puerto Rico, agents get into position to hit dozens of locations simultaneously.
Here's where the adrenaline started pumping. This was a culmination of a lot of intense work on the parts of a lot of people.
At the home of machetero leader Filiberto Ojeda, FBI SWAT and members of the elite FBI hostage rescue team surround the building and order Ojeda to come out and surrender.
They were calling him by name, telling him that we had an arrest warrant, asking him to come out, give himself up.
Ojeda doesn't answer. SWAT finally decides to go in and get him.
A burst of automatic fire came down the stairwell. One of those rounds ricocheted off the wall and struck the team leader in the eye.
Agents pull the injured man to safety and call for a medevac helicopter. They know that soon they'll have to go back inside to confront a terrorist who won't go down without a fight and won't hesitate to kill. The FBI attempts to arrest the leader of a deadly terrorist group. But he opens fire, hitting an HRT member in the eye. After evacuating the wounded man, FBI agents continue to urge the terrorist leader to surrender. FBI Special Agent Jose Rodriguez.
Finally, he started coming down the stairs. When he did, he had a Uzi slung over his right shoulder, and his left hand could not be seen. He had his left hand down to the side of his pants.
Terrorist leader Filiberto Ojeda continues slowly down the stairs.
As he got down to the base of the stairs, he raised his left hand, and the HRT member saw that he had a semi-automatic handgun. The HRT member yelled for him to drop it. When he didn't, the HRT member had fired 2 times, and he saw Ojeda buckle, and he thought that he had struck Ojeda in the chest.
The shot actually hit Ojeda's handgun. Although unhurt, he gives up. In Dallas, Juan Segarra is arrested without incident. FBI Special Agent Fernando Candelario escorts Ojeda to jail.
I told him I'm a Puerto Rican and I have as much right to live here as you do. And he told me, yes, but you're the enemy. If I have to kill you, I will.
Over the next 3 years, Ojeda's attorneys do everything possible to postpone his trial.
The case was delayed and delayed and delayed, primarily by the defense, because they filed motion after motion after motion. Ojeda Rios was in jail for a total of 36 months, primarily based upon defense motions.
After all the legal wrangling, his attorneys now claim he must be released on bond because his right to a speedy trial has been violated. The claim goes all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. The Supreme Court rules that Ojeda must be released to await trial. Over the FBI's protests, Ojeda goes free, wearing an electronic monitoring bracelet.
We knew that wasn't going to hold him. Of course, he wasn't in our custody at that point. He's the responsibility of the pretrial services.
While awaiting trial, Ojeda gives speeches to try to build support for the macheteros.
Now he can brag about the macheteros. Now he's no longer covert, he's overt.
While Ojeda's attorneys delay, 4 other macheteros, including Juan Segarra, are convicted in Hartford, Connecticut for their roles in the Big Sleep heist. A year after his release on bond, Ojeda makes a bold statement to the media and cuts off his electronic bracelet. He disappears into the rugged mountains to resume his fight to turn the island into a communist dictatorship. 2 years later, a federal court in Connecticut convicts Ojeda in absentia of bank robbery and conspiracy. With his conviction, 14 of the top macheteros have been found guilty. While Ojeda is at large, the FBI keeps up the pressure to find him. FBI Special Agent Fernando Candelario.
I'm confident that he'll be arrested again because we did it once before, you know, and when we, like they say, we always get our man, and I think that time is on our side.
In September of 2005, the FBI locates Ojeda. He is shot and killed after firing on agents. The macheteros' reign of terror has come to an end.
And unless you're committed to go after them with as much commitment as they got, you're not going to get them. They were macheteros 24 hours a day.
The trials also help reveal the truth about the macheteros.
These people don't just want independence for Puerto Rico. These people want something much bigger than that. They want to convert Puerto Rico into the next Cuba.
Today, through democratic elections, the people of Puerto Rico retain the right to decide whether to become a state, remain a commonwealth, or become independent. Thanks to the FBI, they remain free to determine their own fate. In a world where money is everything and life means nothing, a drug gang stalks the streets of Chicago. They are heavily armed, well-funded, and have dangerous international contacts. It will take every weapon in the FBI's arsenal to stop a deadly threat known as the El Rukins.
1980s, the drug trade ravaged Chicago's inner-city neighborhoods. Heroin and cocaine sales soared. Violent crime threatened to destroy the community. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. As drug profits grew, gangs ruled the streets. One of the most dangerous was called El Rucan. Agents teamed up with state and local police to bring them down, but in the process, uncovered a bizarre and frightening terrorist plot.
Chicago, Illinois. In the early 1980s, it is one of the deadliest major cities in America. Powerful drug gangs have transformed the South Side from a neighborhood into a war zone. To combat the rising tide of violence, the FBI forms the Organized Crime Drug Enforcement Task Force. In Chicago, their prime target is a vicious gang known as the El Rucans. John Podliska is an assistant U.S. attorney in Chicago.
The business of the El Rucans was to traffic in narcotics, cocaine and heroin, and to control a vast area on the south side of Chicago for purposes of selling and distributing those narcotics. They would exact tribute from other people who would want to sell in that area, and they had a reputation, and a well-deserved reputation, for being one of, if not the most successful and the most violent criminal drug-dealing organizations in the Chicago area.
In the spring of 1985, several members split from the gang. They try to move in on El Rucan territory. Revenge is swift and deadly. Chicago's South Side is gripped by a vicious turf war. As the murder rate climbs, the FBI seems powerless to stop the violence. Then, in May, an informant gives agents a tip. Several members of the El Rucan gang have left Chicago. They are hiding out in a house in Cleveland. Many of them are wanted for murder. FBI agents and Cleveland police raid the house and arrest several suspects. One of them is a man named Anthony Sumner. Sumner is a former El Rucan general, which makes him potentially useful. If investigators can turn him, they can get intelligence on the secret of El Rucans.
Sumner, how you doing?
Detectives question Sumner for hours. He implicates himself in a double homicide in Chicago and is facing serious time. Authorities offer to reduce charges, but only if Sumner tells them everything he knows about the El Rucans. Finally, the former El Rucan general agrees to cooperate. As Sumner talks to authorities, a terrifying picture emerges. The El Rucan gang has hundreds of members. They're heavily armed, they're well organized, and they're growing. The entire organization is run by Jeff Fort, a kingpin known for his efficiency and his brutality.
He was at the top, controlling the entire organization. Directly below him were 21 generals, and he preserved his power that way. If anyone tried to seize power from him, from amongst those 21 generals, there were 20 other people who would be in a position to let him know that, and he could retaliate.
Authorities thought they had taken Ford out of commission. In 1983, he was convicted of cocaine trafficking and sentenced to 13 years in a Texas prison. According to Sumner, Jeff Fort continues to run the El Rucans. He uses the prison payphones to contact his gang in Chicago. Sumner's statement is a major break in the El Rukin case, according to Assistant U.S. Attorney Patrick Deedy.
He was the first person to actually confirm what the authorities had thought for a long time, which was that Jeff Fort, who is currently in penitentiary in Texas, was regularly talking on the telephone to members of the El Rukins in Chicago and coordinating or directing activities of the organization.
The El Rukins run their operation out of a converted movie theater on the south side of Chicago.
It had been fortified by the El Rukins and was essentially a fortified fortress. He had people at the headquarters of the El Rukins who were required to sit by that phone 24 hours a day. There was always someone at the phone so that when he called, he could give his instructions, directions, and orders as to what he wanted done with his organization.
For the task force, Jeff Fort's telephone conversations are an opportunity to learn more about the organization.
Yes, Imam.
No one questioned what he said and what he wanted done. There was absolutely no debate, discussion, objection to anything that he was saying.
And so the FBI over the summer 1985 began to develop evidence to provide a sufficient probable cause to go and to begin to listen to these conversations.
Agents activate a 24-hour wiretap to record the Kingpin's phone calls. Tom Coram is a former special agent with the FBI. In 1985, he is assigned to the Drug Task Force and the El Rukin case.
The technicians installed the wiretap equipment through the telephone company. Nothing was actually installed at the prison. We did all of our monitoring. In fact, in Austin, Texas, which was 40 to 50 miles away from Bastrop, Texas, where the prison was located. We were really stunned when we started hearing the conversation from Fort, because he was speaking with key gang leaders in Chicago, and what we were hearing was just strings of words.
Jeff Fort and his gang are talking in code.
And the kinds of series of words that we would hear said would be things like, in the science of Taku, love, truth, perfect man. And we had no idea what these words meant. And we couldn't establish any form of reference to figure out what he was saying during these conversations.
Agents believe that Fort and the El Rukins are discussing drug deals.
Okay.
But until they crack the gang's code, they can't prove a thing.
One of the Chicago police officers came up with really a very good idea. Chicago Police Department had uniformed officers almost on a daily basis make some sort of contact with the El Rukin gang members just to let them know that the Chicago Police Department was in the neighborhood and that they were being watched. And so the Chicago detective came up with the idea of having one of the uniformed officers go up to the gang headquarters, speak to one of the gang leaders while Jeff Fort was on the telephone, and see if the gang members would encode what the police officer had said to the gang member and then feed it back to Jeff Fort in the coded form. And what we heard was the gang member come back up to the telephone where Jeff Fort was on the phone at the time and then encode that statement that had been made to him by the police officer. So at that point we learned the code words for one, the word for pound, and the word for marijuana.
Now what about?
And the word for marijuana we found out at that time was perfect man.
Again?
Breaking the El Rukin code is slow, painstaking work. After 2 months, agents only know a fraction of the gang's business.
we realized that we were missing a lot of the calls that were being made from other phones at the El Rucan headquarters in Chicago. So we knew that the operation that we were running in Texas needed to be concluded, and we needed to set operations back up in Chicago and begin monitoring all of the phones inside the gang headquarters in order to get the whole story.
In December, Agent Coram and his team decide to move the wiretap operation to Chicago. They establish a new listening post near El Rucan headquarters. As authorities activate the new wiretap, they encounter a familiar problem.
When we turned the wire on in Chicago, I found that once again I was hearing words that I didn't understand.
The El Rucan gang is using a new code. They may have found out the FBI was listening. Once again, Agent Coram can't understand what they're saying.
It was like we had to start all over again when I thought we would be able to pick up where we left off when we shut the operation down in Texas.
Hour after hour, Coram listens to the recordings. He slowly pieces together phrases.
Yeah, he's talked about New York.
Something is different. Something has changed.
Some of the words I started picking up were words like up. I started hearing words that related to travel, and there hadn't been any words that related to travel during the Texas operation. I started hearing references to New York, and I eventually heard a reference to Libya that really caused me to be really, really concerned about what changes had occurred during the 3 or 4 months that we had not been monitoring the telephones.
It's a chilling discovery. Libya, a rogue nation in North Africa, is suspected of state-sponsored terrorism. A well-armed drug gang, combined with foreign terrorists, could pose a deadly threat to national security. In Chicago, an FBI wiretap reveals that Jeff Fort continues to run the El Rucan gang from prison.
Bring it all back to me.
Although the gang talks in code, authorities learn they are discussing Libya, a country suspected of terrorism. Investigators of the Chicago Drug Task Force spend hours listening to the recorded conversations. To Special Agent Tom Coram, it doesn't make sense. Why is a Chicago drug gang talking about Libya?
I went back to the beginning and started listening to the conversations again, and I started piecing the bits and pieces of the conversation together and came to the conclusion that they were talking about having met with someone in Libya who was going to provide them with money for destroying an airplane here in the United States.
Coram alerts the U.S. Attorney's Office. The drug investigation has uncovered a potential terrorist plot. The FBI calls in the Joint Terrorism Task Force. Special Agent Ned Hamara is assigned to the Terrorism Task Force in Chicago.
We took it seriously because we had no idea whether it was real or not. It was decided that the Terrorism Task Force take over the wire and continue an investigation to determine what, if anything, was going on. The Drug Task Force offered their agents to help with overhearing the wire talk and recorded conversations.
If authorities hope to unravel El Rucan's plans, they need to decipher the new code quickly and completely.
This is the conversation.
At that time, we took our surveillance teams and put them to work.
Fred Wheat is a lieutenant with the Chicago Police Department. His specialty is surveillance. In 1985, Wheat is assigned to the FBI's Terrorism Task Force.
We were brought in because they knew that they would need surveillance, and also that a number of the Chicago police officers had worked El Rucans before and would be helpful in setting up the strategy to work this organization.
The surveillance team's job is to make physical observations that can be compared to the information agents are hearing on the wiretap.
We basically had round-the-clock surveillance on different members of the group who were involved with the conversations with Jeff Fort. We were watching those members and just trying to follow their activities. On one instance, one of the gang members reads a newspaper article to Jeff Fort and substitutes the code word for the actual newsprint. So, I mean, we had a verbatim interpretation of some of those code words because he describes an incident on the south side of Chicago where there was a shooting involving a landlord and a neighbor of some sort. And so we were able to take those code words and go back to previous conversations, insert them into conversations, which solved a lot of our deciphering of some coded conversations.
Okay. That's it. Slowly, agents crack the new code. Ron Reddy is a special agent with the FBI's Chicago field office.
The calls that are being intercepted at the El Rucan headquarters basically concern two areas. They concern the El Rucan's normal business of engaging in drug transactions, as well as what we are beginning to realize is a plot between the El Rucans and the government of Libya.
How'd it go?
Knowing the violent history of this particular organization, we were afraid that the El Rucans were going to commit an act of terrorism in the United States in order to obtain money from the Libyan government.
From the wiretap, authorities learned that several members of the El Rucan gang recently traveled to Libya. As agents continue to monitor the gang's conversations, the situation with Libya deteriorates. On April 2nd, 1986, a bomb detonates aboard TWA Flight 840 between Rome and Athens. 4 Americans are killed. 9 are injured. The FBI suspects the government of Libya and President Muammar Gaddafi are responsible for the carnage.
On April 4th of 1986, there was a series of conversations between Jeff Fort and a general in the El Rucan organization known as Melvin Mays. And they discussed this explosion on this flight between Rome and Greece. And Mays, at one point in the conversation, indicates that their group would be able to do something like that within 30 to 50 days.
Yeah. It is a terrifying prospect.
Why don't you take a video?
Via the decoded wiretap, the task force listens in on Fort's plans. The gang leader wants 2 of his generals, Leon McAnderson and Rico Cranshaw, to make another trip to Libya.
Fort was really concerned about how are we going to convince the Libyans, that we're an organization that can do something for them. One of the things that we were able to determine, he talked about getting newspaper clippings to take back over there to show the Libyans that this is what we've been doing, this is what we can do. Violent things that happen that the Arukans are responsible for. The whole idea was to convince the Libyans that the El Rucans were an organization big enough to commit some significant terrorist activity or acts in the United States on their behalf. We believed it was a real threat.
If McAnderson and Cranshaw return to Libya, federal agents will not be far behind. In Chicago, FBI agents and police wiretap the El Rucan gang. 2 of Jeff Fort's generals are planning a trip overseas to convince Libyan officials that El Rucan can perform terrorist acts within the United States. Travel restrictions to Libya make the trip impossible. Ron Reddy is a special agent with the FBI assigned to the Joint Terrorism Task Force.
The United States had just engaged in at least 2 military actions against the Libyans, and the El Rukns knew that the Libyans were under scrutiny from the United States government. The El Rukns, as well as the Libyans, felt that the safest place for them to meet would be in Panama, which they called the Straw Hat. That was their particular code word for Panama.
Cranshaw and McAnderson, 2 high-ranking El Rukn generals, will make the trip to Panama City. The task force needs surveillance on both men from the moment they leave Chicago until they return. On May 3rd, Cranshaw and McAnderson leave El Rukn headquarters. A surveillance team is not far behind. The El Rukns board a jet in Chicago, bound for Miami. From there, they fly to Panama. In Panama, Cranshaw and McAnderson are seen entering the Libyan embassy, presumably to meet with government officials. And on May 10th, the 2 El Rukns return to the United States.
We knew when they were coming back, and we worked with our colleagues at U.S. Customs and asked them to do a search of these individuals when they arrived in Miami.
They found a document in Rico Crenshaw's luggage, which they photographed. Crenshaw and McAnderson were not aware that this was happening, but the document was in Crenshaw's handwriting.
Basically, they had written a letter that said that they had 5-man cells in cities throughout the United States and that they were interested in trying to destabilize the government.
The next day, on May 11th, the task force intercepts several telephone conversations between the 2 El Rukns and their leader, Jeff Fort. Cranshaw and McAnderson tell Fort the Libyans have agreed to provide financing. They will deposit the money in a Panamanian bank in the United States. An attorney they met in Panama will contact them shortly. For the task force, it's a terrifying development. But agents don't have enough evidence to prosecute the El Rukn gang on conspiracy charges.
In order for the FBI to establish that a crime has been committed, we must collect enough evidence to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the conspiracy had actually taken place and that there was an intended goal of the conspiracy. And we had to prove that there was a serious plan to commit an act of terrorism here in the United States.
Agents continue to listen to the wiretap, hoping to learn more.
During June, Fort talks about sending El Rukns over to Libya to learn bomb-making skills. He said we can send some of the soldiers or members over there. They could learn how to make bombs. Those individuals can come back to the United States and teach other members how to make bombs.
As alarming as this scenario is, it's still not enough to prove a conspiracy. Weeks go by. The money from the Libyans never shows up. Fort panics. He will do anything to make the deal.
In late June, early July, Fort became, he just saw that the money was not going to be coming from the Libyans and that he had to do something, or the El Rukns had to do something to show the Libyans, that they were somebody to respect. He talked about damaging a government building. He talked about planting bombs. He talked about blowing up an airplane. And he talked about getting a rocket, one that you can use once and throw away. So we figured, okay, how can we address this issue?
Through the wiretaps we're hearing.
Fort wants to buy military-grade weapons. The task force decides to use it to their advantage by becoming El Rucan's sole supplier.
What I can do today. Okay.
So enter Special Agent Willie Hulon. Willie was on the drug task force. He had already made one drug buy with Alan Knox through an FBI cooperating source.
Alan Knox is a high-ranking El Rucan. Agents assume he is aware of Fort's plans.
So we figured that we'd set up another drug buy with Alan Knox, and at which point Special Agent Hulon could introduce the idea that he had a weapons contact and so on, and that they might be able to supply the El Rucans or somebody else with weapons or any military equipment.
He mentions that he has a friend who works at a military base, a friend who can steal weapons. Knox is interested.
Willie Hulon is an amazing individual. He's cool, calm, collected, works well under pressure. He was ideal for this situation. His knowledge of the street gangs, his calmness and operating sources, and Willie was perfect for this role.
Knox tells Hulon about the kind of weapons the gang wants to buy.
They were interested in grenade launchers, and so when he described the grenade launchers, he said it's the type that Clint Eastwood used in the movie, which obviously is a law rocket.
The M72 Law Rocket is the U.S. Army's primary light anti-tank weapon. The shoulder-launched missile can penetrate a foot of armor at a range of over 200 meters. It can destroy a tank, a building, or even a low-flying airliner. Agents cannot allow El Rucan to obtain such a deadly weapon on the open market. But the development does offer unique opportunities.
We decided that why not we supply, or the FBI supply, the El Rucans with a rocket.
Special Agent Willie Hulon negotiates with Alan Knox on the price.
You guys doing all right? Thank you. Yeah.
He tells Knox he can get law rockets for $1,850 apiece.
Got a man on the inside.
Obviously, we weren't going to sell these guys a law rocket that they could use or would even work. But that being said, we wanted to sell them a device that looked like a real law rocket, and on a cursory inspection would appear to them to be a real law rocket.
And they will buy for that $2,200.
The ATF, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, constructs a dummy law rocket. Although it looks like the real thing, it does not contain an explosive charge. The ATF also installs a radio transmitter so agents can track the device from a distance. The inert rocket is ready. The trap is set. On July 29th, the task force launches the operation.
Take out an aircraft.
On July 29th, 1986, the FBI's Joint Terrorism Task Force launches a complex sting operation. Agents will attempt to sell a dummy law rocket to the El Rucans, a gang of vicious drug dealers who are willing to sell out their own country to Libyan terrorists. Gang leader Jeff Fort takes the bait. He tells Alan Knox to set up the buy.
And we're hearing this on the wiretap after the meeting, so we know that it's going to go forward. The arrangements which were basically given to us by the El Rucans was we were going to meet them, or the transaction was going to occur
task force meets to plan the sting operation. The sale of the law rocket will go down at a hotel in Lansing, Illinois, 30 miles from Chicago.
Normally, we would have never conducted an undercover investigation like this because of the extreme danger to Agent Hulant, but the fact that we knew that the El Rukns were dealing with the Libyans, we had to weigh those risks and ultimately decided that we could do it safely, that we could make the transaction safely and protect the life of our undercover agent.
Surveillance teams will form the outer perimeter, 4 blocks from the hotel.
Like I said, ultimately,
SWAT and undercover teams will form an inner perimeter, stationed in and around the hotel.
What's going to happen when our operation? At this point, we have the north, south.
On July 31st, agents from the FBI, the ATF, the DEA, and the Chicago Police Department deployed to the hotel in Lansing, Illinois. They cannot fail. The lives of hundreds and possibly thousands of people are at stake.
On the night of the law rocket deal, we probably had in excess of 50 individuals spread out through different areas.
Surveillance teams assigned to the outer perimeter get into position. At 6:30 p.m., a car enters the perimeter. There are 2 men inside. Agents are unable to identify either one of them. Detective Wheat's surveillance team picks up the incoming vehicle. He follows it to a gas station nearby. At the gas station, Wheat is able to make a positive ID. Melvin Mays is the driver. Alan Knox is in the passenger seat.
Moments after Melvin had departed the gas station, we saw him go in toward the inner perimeter. We passed on the plate number of the vehicle, the color of the vehicle, the make of the vehicle, all pertinent information that would help us keep this vehicle under surveillance.
At the hotel, task force members get into position.
We had a complement of SWAT, other surveillance people, other case agents in adjacent rooms, down hallways, different floors. Everything to control that situation. We didn't want people from another floor coming up. We didn't want to have citizens who weren't a part of this deal getting caught in the crossfire if that happened. The outer teams were prepared to move in to help secure this area in the event that things went wrong, so that it was plenty of firepower there on hand to deal with any situation that might develop.
Mays and Knox arrive at the hotel within minutes. The sale is about to go down. The task force is ready. They know the El Rukns are willing to do whatever it takes to fulfill Jeff Fort's orders and make the buy. On the night of July 31st, 1986, 2 members of the El Rukn gang arrive at a hotel in Lansing, Illinois. They have arranged to purchase a light anti-tank rocket. Their goal, to prove to the Libyan government that the El Rukns can operate as terrorists for hire. They have no idea that the man they are dealing with is an undercover FBI agent. Members of the Joint Terrorism Task Force can hear every word of the transaction. Detective Fred Wheat and his surveillance team is stationed 4 blocks from the hotel.
We heard a knock on the door. We could actually hear the physical knock. We heard some voices and someone asked who it was, etc. He was admitted into the room. We could hear them negotiate or talk about the sale of the rocket. launch. A little something extra I threw in.
I can't see the rocket launcher. Where's it at?
It's on the photo. You know I don't do business like that. Where's the cash?
It's close.
You get your launcher when I get my cash.
A few minutes later, Melvin Mays leaves the hotel. He needs to get final confirmation from gang leader Jeff Fort before the sale can be completed. Mays returns to El Rucan headquarters to wait for Fort's call.
Jeff Fort controlled every aspect of the El Rucan organization, to include this transaction.
The wiretap picks up the phone call between Mays and Jeff Fort. Fort seems leery about the buy. He's worried that it's a setup. Fort instructs Mays to bring a young gang member back with him. They should arrive at the hotel in separate cars. If the buy is a setup, Jeff Fort would rather sacrifice a low-level gang member than risk one of his generals.
In other words, Fort did not want any contact or any trading of money between the undercover agents who he suspected and his generals.
Fort orders him to deliver the money to the hotel and then pick up the law rocket. The sale goes off without a hitch.
What you think? Thank you, sir. Still all there, right? Pleasure doing business with you. All right. Thank you.
The El Rucans have no idea that the law rocket is a dummy. The low-level El Rucan takes off in the direction of Chicago. Surveillance units follow him onto the Dan Ryan Expressway.
At that point, we had surveillance behind them, in front of them, on the side of them, down the expressway, coming on at certain exits, getting off at certain exits.
Suddenly, the young gang member transporting the law rocket pulls over and stops. Seconds later, another vehicle pulls alongside him. It's Melvin Mays.
What are you doing? Stop.
As it turns out, the gang member's car has broken down. The law rocket is transferred to Mays' car.
Get back in your car. We would not have known that it changed from one vehicle to the other or one person to the other unless we had a physical eye on that transaction.
The law rocket had been equipped with a radio transmitter, and we were using electronic equipment and physical surveillance to follow the rocket back to where they eventually stored it.
Mays drives to an apartment building on South Kenwood Avenue, a few miles from El Rucan headquarters. The gang members refer to this building as the Armory.
Then our job really began, because at that point we were 24/7 on that location, because we had to make sure that that law rocket was not moved.
Special Agent Ned Hamara continues to monitor the wiretap.
A couple days went by. Fort's fears were allayed that they weren't police, and in subsequent conversations, he says, okay, let's buy 5 more. You know, we want 5 more, and we're going to test one.
Task force members are worried. Fort has chosen a target to prove his terrorist capabilities. He intends to kill a Chicago police detective.
The detective who was kind of, he worked for the Gang Crime Chicago Police Department, who was kind of a thorn for many years in the El Rucan side. They hated him, and they figured, okay, we're going to buy some rockets, but we're going to use one, and we're going to test it on him.
Gentlemen, according to the wiretap,
The attorneys and the agents all made a decision, okay, let's take it down now. Let's not wait any further, because we figured if they tried to test the law rocket, they're going to determine that it's a dummy rocket and it's going to blow a lot of people's cover.
The FBI makes a dangerous call. It's time to take down the El Rucan gang and put Jeff Fort behind bars forever. The FBI has the El Rucan gang on the hook. They have surveillance photos and wiretaps of the gang purchasing a dummy law rocket. From his prison in Texas, gang leader Jeff Fort instructs the El Rucans to buy 5 more rockets. He wants to test fire one of them to prove that his gang can perform terrorist hits for hire.
We had to prevent the El Rucans from actually doing something to try to impress the Libyans. We felt it prudent at that time that we'd gone along far enough, we had enough evidence to at least put them behind bars for at least weapon charges, if not the terrorist activities. We weren't going to take the chances that they were going to get a law rocket from an outside source and use it.
A live law rocket in the hands of a violent gang like the El Rucans would be catastrophic.
I think everybody decided it was time to take it down.
On the morning of August 5th, the task force launches simultaneous raids on El Rucan headquarters and on the apartment building they call the Armory.
That building at 39th and Drexel was a fortified fort. It had steel doors on both the front and rear and iron gates across the other doors. We had to use a burning bar that day to gain entry into the fort to execute our search warrant.
Go, 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 go!
We went from surveillance officers to search and control officers. We began systematically arresting across the city all individuals that were involved in this plot.
In an office at El Rucan headquarters, authorities find travel itineraries to Libya for Rico Cranshaw and Leon McAnderson. The second arrest team raids the apartment building on South Kenwood Avenue.
I was at the location on South Kenwood. Our main objective was to find the law rocket. We're walking all through the complex, you know, behind the ATF agent who's got the beacon, and he's going upstairs and downstairs and all around. Oh, it's getting fader, we're getting stronger. We were in there for, it seemed like a half hour, and we're walking and we're still not getting it. Finally, we go down into the basement. And this is a rat-infested, roach-infested location. But when we're going down the stairs, it gets louder and louder and louder.
It's getting stronger right about here.
Finally, we decided it's got to be under the stairwell. So we ripped open the stairwell, and sure enough, the law rocket was there, along with about 35 other assortment of automatic weapons that we discovered. Some of them were submachine guns. Who knows, how many weapons were used in crimes or murders or what. The main thing, we got the law rocket back before they were able to determine that it, was an inert or dummy law rocket.
Hands up! Hands up! Hands up! Hands up!
McAnderson and Cranshaw are arrested without incident. Alan Knox is also taken into custody. Melvin Mays is nowhere to be found. On October 30th, 1986, Jeff Fort, Alan Knox, Rico Cranshaw, and Leon McAnderson are indicted on charges of conspiracy, possession of weapons, and use of interstate facilities to carry on unlawful activities. Melvin Mays, who is still a fugitive, is placed on the FBI's 10 most wanted list. In 1987, McAnderson and Cranshaw are convicted and sentenced to more than 50 years in prison. Melvin Mays eludes authorities for nearly 9 years. In 1995, he is arrested and convicted and sentenced to 3 life terms in prison. Jeff Fort, who is already incarcerated, is sentenced to spend an additional 80 years in prison.
This was the first instance in the United States history that American citizens had been convicted for attempting to commit a terrorist act for a foreign government.
For Chicago police, the El Rucan case is a major victory. A dangerous street gang has been destroyed. For the FBI, the El Rucan case is a battle won in the ongoing war against terrorism.